Hi there, this is Dax from Quad Spinner, and in this video, I'm going to show you the breakdown of this volcanic terrain. So, this volcano is kind of special for us because when we originally started Quad Spinner, this was literally the location where we came up with the idea. It's a volcano in Central America called Arenal. I'm going to show you a few pictures of it. So, this is where Quad Spinner kind of started, and volcano is a great place to see erosion happen in so many different forms in real time. So, anyways, I've long wanted to create a volcano like this, and so this is a pretty straightforward way of making a volcano, even though it can be somewhat deceptively complicated. So I'm going to show you the tricks that I use for creating production ready volcanoes. So what we do is I'll actually start with a rough radial gradient. So what I did was created a radial gradient, reduced the height to about half so you can see it's not too tall. And then I added a warp modifier down here. So I just added this warp. Now, the warp size is very small, and the strength is okay. The strength is halfway. So what I wanted was a bumpy surface with no specific large scale features. So when we use any of the Gaea primitives, that's something you get by default, so you don't have to worry about creating those. But since I wanted to show the process from scratch, I figured, okay, let's add one like this. So with this bumpy radial gradient, to get more detail into it that's slightly more geological, I added a sandstone node, and you can see the sandstone node is I'm using a min modifier, so only the protrusions that are smaller than the original, like here, those remain. And just by how the modifier works, just by how sandstone works, we get more at the top than at the bottom. So you can also just use mask by height or whatever works for you. The goal here is we want to have a bit more character from the middle of the terrain all the way to the top, because that's what's going to give us the iconic look of that volcano. Now, while a conical volcano is pretty much a cone, it's crucial to have a lot of detail in there that's not just simple erosion, because a real volcano will go through a lot of different stuff. So let me go back to my pictures to show you. So, and this is something I rarely do. I don't like comparing reference terrains while I'm working. I would rather just absorb what's going on in a picture and then just like keep it in my mind as I work on it. But there are some specific things that are very important to get across. So, for example, you can see the top of the cone is not really just like this clean cut edge. It's actually bumpy. It's, the crater keeps ejecting so much stuff that it undergoes a heavy level of chaos, and things get broken and so forth. There's also a lot of buildup up here and so on. And then halfway through, let me go there. So this is a slightly different side of the volcano. And so here you can see there's a lot more character going on. There are lots of different rock shapes, different buildups. So, anyways, we want to capture that. And of course, since we're making a fictional volcano, we will kind of try to take it to the next level to make it a bit more cinematic. So, whether you're using it in a game or film or whatever, it has like a dominating presence on screen. So, anyways, so to get there, the first thing that we've done is just added sandstone with a very high spacing so that the layers between the sandstone is just like really thick, and we have very high convexity so that they bulge outwards, and instead of just becoming sharper edges for each plate. We also have maximum chaos because we didn't want to have like a systematic look to it. So that's why we do get these layers, but at the same time we get a lot of chaos. And then lastly, you'll see there are 4 passes. I've lowered the iteration to 5, but increased the number of passes to 4. So in essence, we're getting a total of 20 different types of layering happening with this. You may want to experiment with the seed because you want to have like a cool top like here. You don't want extra bulges on the side and so on. So that's something to take care of. Next, I added outcrops. Now, outcrops are generally something that can take over the shape very intensely if you're not careful. But because we're still in this beginning phase of it, I'm not too worried about it. So what we do is here, I left pretty much everything to defaults except the size and height. So you can see I'm using a somewhat lower height so that the protrusions aren't too big. And because outcrops kind of feeds on whatever terrain they're being grown on, so to speak, you'll see that the stratification that we had from the previous sandstone, all of that, including this little bulge at the top, all of that has survived. But at the same time, we get all this cool, heavy rock bulk. Now, this may feel like we're going away from the conical volcano look, but like with everything in terrains, you have to create a big bulked up terrain and then erode it heavily to get to where you want to go, because that is, in a way, what happens in real life. So speaking of that, let's add our first erosion here, and you can see now it's starting to get to a more conical look. So first thing we notice here is that we get these beautiful big flow structures. So this is where a lot of volcanic ejecta will fall down and carve out channels. And because especially this specific volcano is in a tropical region that experiences rainfall as well, and that can have like sometimes both of these processes can accelerate the erosion of each other, like whether it's erosion from rainfall being accelerated by these rocks that have fallen down and displaced soil and so forth, or the other way around. We'll get grooves from rainfall that the volcanic ejecta will kind of sometimes fall down from. Anyway, so we now have these nice big flow structures everywhere, and the more protruding aspects of outcrops are kind of going away. So that's great. Now, I've added a shaper so that we could manually force a more conical look. So here you can see it's a very delicate amount, minus 0.16. And I've also ticked maintain file detail. That is kind of important here. We don't want to lose any of the detail that we have. But there's also a little cheat going on here. You'll see at the bottom, I have the height modifier. So we're actually, or mask by height. So we're only shaping like the top little 10% or top 6% really. And we have high fall off and distortion. So let me show you what's going on. So here, like if we were to do the whole terrain, we would lose a lot of bulk at the bottom, and we want to keep that. So I'm going to go back and say we only do this much. We use a lot of fall off because we want a smooth transition, and then a little bit of distortion so that like the mask is not clear. It's like being distorted along the lines here. So that's our little shaping pass. Now we add more erosion, but this time we want to create more sedimentation as opposed to the primary shape. So here what I've done is, you'll see there's a 0 downcutting, but a high duration, a lot of coarse sediments, but no suspended load. So suspended load is where it starts creating these grooves as it erodes, like the downcutting. But by disabling this and downcutting, you can see we have a lot more of the sedimentation coming down, way up here and then going down. But then I've also turned on min mode. So what's happening is, this is our new eroded surface, but by using min mode, we retain all the crucial structure from before, where we have these crevices and collapses and so forth. Now this is where our basic form is almost ready. So it's time to add our crater. So the crater node lets you add a crater and then move it to wherever you want it to. So I moved it to this place, which is almost the center. Well, in some ways it is the center, but you can see there's like a little side bulk here. And while it may be tempting to put it straight center so it's very even, like something you might see in a little sketch or cartoon even, real volcanoes tend to have slightly disformed craters. So you can look at them online and see what works for you. There are many different forms, but since I'm basing this on this one particular volcano and I wanted to have that kind of a lopsided cone, or crater rather, so this is what I did. Left this slightly to the side so there's a little bit of bulk up here. Now, let's go to the next node, which is sandstone, and it is masked again to this top part. So the reason is because we created crater, this area is now very, very smooth, whereas in real life, you can see there's a lot of buildup up here. So we want to kind of mimic that like this. Here you can see the slight lopsidedness. If you're seeing it from another angle, it can be even more enhanced. So anyways, to get like this kind of look, we have our lopsided crater and then sandstone to create this extra detail. You can see the settings here. It's just one pass, but lots of iterations, medium amount of spacing, and then it's a lot of tilt and chaos so that the striations, the layering, they're like going this way instead of being too even down here. That has started breaking up this cone or the top part of the cone. So then we add another pass of erosion. And this one, we're using orographic influence that we just introduced in Gaea 2.2. And so we're restricting the precipitation or whatever the source of this hydraulic erosion is to the top 8%. So let's say here this much, like this much on the terrain. So the idea being that we only want this part to be eroded. We don't want the rest of it to be touched. But if something flows down and affects it, great. We're not going to mind that. So you can see here, there's nothing. And then when we add this, all that down cutting starts happening. There's furrow being created that goes all the way down and joins this bigger structure. Well, great. That's just adding to the whole thing and making it more realistic. So let's keep that. For the settings, you'll see that I have a very low amount for shape so we can preserve most of what's going on up there. Lots of discharge of all kinds, and slightly strong down cutting compared to how small the erosion scale is. We don't want too big an erosion scale because then it starts creating larger furrows. We don't want those. And so that's pretty much this for our basic shaping. Now, to add one more layer of erosion, and again, it's always great where you can layer erosion on top of erosion. It always gives you more opportunities to create things for your terrain. What I wanted to do here was kind of like have like a single pass that unites the few different passes that we've done before. And so I create a flow mask from this, maximum length, maximum volume, and then use that as the precipitation for one more erosion pass. And so it starts creating a lot of sediment. As you can see, I have bed load, coarse sediments at maximum, no down cutting, and maximum duration. So you can see it's a lot of discharge coming down from up here. Then at the same time, this is now both min and height masks to be at the bottom. So instead of it being all the way up here, where you can see the cone is pretty much destroyed, we're keeping it down here somewhere. I forgot what the exact number was, but I think this should be fine. You can always just tweak this to whatever you want it to be. Now, one more pass for sedimentation using just the sediments node, which is a cheaper, easier way of creating all this sediment. So you can see I have a tiny scale of 0.01, but 8 passes to create this finer sediment. The smaller the scale, the finer the sediment you get. And then the more number of passes is the more amount of deposition that you get. This also is masked by height because at this point our cone is so cool that we don't want anything messing with it and ruining it. So this is where mask by height comes in very handy, and you can see like with the previous one, we have that similar amount of masking going on, so all the sedimentation happens here. Now finally, the cone is a bit too sharp. So here you can see it looks like it's gouged out, but in real life these larger cones, especially depending on the size, and here we have a pretty wide cone compared to the rest of the body of the volcano. So this would not be this sharp. The edge would not be so pinched. And so one way to reduce that kind of sharper detail without affecting any of the surrounding detail is to just use graphic equalization. It's a very low level thing, but it's very useful. So first we mask it out. So I created a mask for this area, simple enough. Feed it to the mask for graphic equalizer. And in graphic equalizer, I've removed band 6. I've reduced 5 and 4 halfway or a little less than halfway. And so that's what we're getting. So let me show you what this would be if it was normal. It's like this, but then you remove this. We're keeping band 7, so all the finest details stay. But the one below that goes. And so kind of, again, don't remember what the exact numbers were, but I'll just go by visual. And yeah, that kind of works. So this is more smoothed out. And this is where the terrain is pretty much done. I've added a choke point here, which I always like to do at the end, because let's say if I suddenly think of like, ooh, let's add a swirl to this whole thing, then I don't have to reconnect these few hundred connections. So I'll just go here, let's say add a swirl. It's like, oh, that's our new volcano. Well, all we have to do is just connect it here and we're done. If you forget to create a choke point, a very easy way is to just go here, right click insert choke point, select which port. Hey, there's another choke point for you. So, that started processing everything. I'll delete my old choke point, leave the new one here. And then let's take a look at the next phase, which is texturing. And well, this looks a bit complicated. It's really not. It's just a bunch of layers of colors that we're going to use. So at this point, our volcano looks pretty cool, but we need to have texturing that matches it. And now with the power of color erosion, we can actually create textures that show you that ejecta is coming down the slopes from the cone, so that it gives you that that live feeling of this volcano. That it's still active. Now, first thing I do is I create a texture base. That's what's going to run all these textures. So we have 2 of them. So this is the first one where I didn't want it to have like too many specific shapes. So I've reduced flows completely, but increased patches and chaos. I've also added a little bit of peak so that the top gets highlighted. Let's say if I were to remove that, we would get something more like this, but with peaks. There, it's nice. We get a little more highlighting up here, which will help us as we want to draw more attention towards the cone with certain colors. So the first thing is we'll create the base, and for that you can see there's this. It's nothing special, looks splotchy, but what's happening is we're getting this, and then we're feeding it this color. And I've equalized it so that the colors are stretched to both extents as much as possible. But then to make sure that there's no shape definition left, like I didn't want like the edges to hug too closely to these features, so I increased the roughness. Like without it, you can see it's like this. You can see where it's going down into the deeper crevices, but I didn't want it to be that precise, so I made it medium. And then it kind of blurs out the edges a little. And then on top of that, added a bit of weathering. This is where I wanted to highlight the shapes in two different ways. One, weathering. Here you can see it's a tiny amount, a little bit of high creep, but I've also turned on washed out and darker. So with darker, it's like there. It's if I turn it back on, you can see that it's accentuating some of the deeper places by adding more shadows to the color texture, which will make this look cooler. And then washed out, instead of having everything be precise, like with all the movement going on, it appears a bit more washed out, more part of the base color texture. So then we have a second layer, a color layer, which is the dead soil. We will have like a lot of textural changes just in the base dark soil or whatever base layer that's on your terrain. So this helps with that. There's a slight bit of green in this too, and that's intentional because vegetation does grow on these slopes. And so we'll come back on a second pass for that, but I wanted that to be there, like little hints, because this soil is really, really fertile. So that takes care of kind of our base. And then I created a second texture base, which is very heavy on flows in soil and not much so on everything else. And that is used to create this dull growth. This dull growth is often like grass and little plants that grows very much in ways where you can find like water flowing and so on. So that's why I wanted to have like this texture and not this texture. And then for the more richer growth like this, we do go back to the original texture because that's where we want to follow the form of the terrain more than anything. Finally, there's a mixer node. You can see it's been like we have the terrain coming in, the base, which is this weathering, that's the main input. And then the layers we have dead soil, dull growth, and rich growth. And so each of these you can see has been masked. We're using a little bit of slope. And like I tend to do a lot with my layering, color layering especially, I have a lot of warp but a small size so that it's never an even line anywhere. So anyways, let's start with the dead soil. Let me just hide the others so we can just look at this. So this is where the dead soil comes in. It's kind of like stops somewhere here. So it helps us differentiate the more lower portions from the top height. And that's where we have more grayer, darker browns coming in, because that's what volcanic ejecta will often end up looking like. This is the more cooler gray, so we can very quickly differentiate between the two. Then we add dull growth. So that's where it's coming up the surface like this. It's a bit imprecise, but we're not too worried about that. You can play with this to get a level that you're happy with. The reason I'm not too worried about this is most of this is going to be overtaken by the rich growth. So as we add that, you can see there's a whole layer here. Just so you can see, the blue represents the dull growth and the yellow represents the rich growth. So while it doesn't overpower it completely by area, it will overpower it with color erosion, which is going to be our next step. So all of this is layered in that way where color will flow down from the top to the bottom. And that's what we want to take advantage of. So that's what we have here, like a little bit of just constrained by height, and that's it. Going back to the dull growth, again, same thing. We want to have like lots of warping. You can see I have that everywhere. But in the rich growth, I added like a very large size so that we can see the rich growth kind of suddenly leap up and come up here. And that's the kind of stuff you will actually see on these volcanoes where there might be certain portions where lava flows, like here. You can see the flow goes down here and may not necessarily go down here because of this pre-existing structure that is like a almost like a gravity sink for this, so everything flows down here. And so this is where vegetation has a chance to grow up a little, or grow further upwards on the slope. Okay, now color erosion. Boom. There we go. That has created this beautiful texture. We have all this brown element or dark grain brown element from up top coming down. We have the more dead soil with the cooler lava stuff and minor growth and everything intermingling with the two different growth layers. All this lava flow is supposed to erase any vegetation down there, so that's doing its job and it's working perfectly. So you can see most of the settings are a bit on the high side except blend, because I didn't want the colors to like take over too much. So we have just, normal blend. We have very high flow volume and color hold because we want the color to flow down, and we don't necessarily worry too much about it sticking to the existing flow structure. So if it goes out, like for example, this is what it would be like with lower flow, but then I wanted it to be higher flow here so that we have these wide lava flows coming down. You can always just adjust this to however you want it to be to create different kinds of outputs. Now, the last part is where we grow some trees, and that's where it gets a tiny bit creative. We're going to go away from a standard view of doing this with the existing nodes and hack ourselves a custom method. So instead of consuming specific masks, like I can get the mask for the growth and so on, I'm going to use a little trick. Basically, we're using an RGB split to take our color erosion, convert it to grayscale, and then just take the green channel. So the green channel here, you can see it's equalized. We're also using strong to pull up the curve, and then inverting it finally. So without inversion. So this is what the green looks like. If I turn all this off, that's the green. So we make it strong and equalize it, but then also invert it. And so now what happens is all the dark areas are where trees can grow, and the brighter areas are where lava and other ejecta are coming down and preventing growth. Because we don't want it to affect everything, I've created a height mask and multiplied this, so we only have it go down this much. And then we use that as an inhibitor for trees. So going all the way back to our choke point, I've created a trees node. Volcanoes, like I said, they often have one of the most fertile soils coming out. So just beyond the lava effect and everything, you will find intense growths. So again, I'll go back to the references that we had, and you can see there's growth going up, and down here there's just a whole thick jungle. So, and this is the other side where you can see the jungle doesn't come up that much, but the dull growth creeps up here. So that's kind of our guide for this specific volcano, at least. Now, what I've done is I've created 600,000 trees relative to resolution. The number here is not that important, but we have, a lot of trees growing everywhere. You can see the health of the ecosystem is high. We have a little bit of patches so that these trees grow in patches and not just more randomly. We have a little bit of spread so they can spread outwards. But the slope and height is very inhibited. It's very limited here, as well as some peak inhibition, so that this top part, basically, that's where we don't want stuff growing. So right now, if I were to go up with the slope, you can see it grows up, but we don't want too much of it. Same for altitude and peaks. We also have dead flow and a little bit of chaos, and finally the custom influence from the green channel that we marked out. So that's also preventing growth up here. Now let me turn on visualize data so that we could see how these things are affecting. So the dead zone, which is set up here, that's in red. And that's showing us where lava can come down and inhibit the growth of these trees. And so this required a bit of fine tuning because dead flow is always a very delicate setting. So usually we use it for snow, where snow actually melts regularly and comes down slope so that trees, or at least larger trees, don't grow in that area. You'll see that in a lot of northern mountains. We're now using that to simulate lava instead, which is just as valid. So anyways, with these slightly consolidated flows, we still get flows everywhere instead of one or two large ones. Lots of dead flow, and then we're controlling how high they are with the snow line. And then of course we have the custom influence, so nothing else grows here, so we don't have to worry about having all of this be covered in dead zone but have it also still go down, because having both of those, well, it's kind of mutually exclusive, so you can either have one or the other. And so that's really what this custom influence option is for. Anyway, so I'm turning visualize data off. Lastly, I have the strict setting on. That means we don't want any stragglers growing outside of these assigned areas. And so with that, you can see it gives us all this beautiful vegetation growing up. Now from up here, it may just look like, oh, hey, mountain with a bald spot. But no, from down here, you can see that it's actually respecting the slopes and creating vegetation just where lava can't touch it, or even the ejecta, like rocks and so forth. And you can see in other places it creeps up and starts to grow wherever it will be allowed by the flows. And so in the end, we end up getting this beautiful complex ecosystem growing up around the volcano. Now, finally, I'm going to add a ground texture node just to sharpen up all the details, and then take the tree's output and equalize it just so we have a hard mask. And then I'll create a noise node, attach it to a sat map with this darker green texture. So you can see we are getting this dark green map for the tree color, because we already have the other two. Like we have the dull one and then the rich one. And so it just makes sense to have these be slightly darker, which older trees in this environment tend to be like. So we have this, and then finally we just blend the two together. So the color that we had from color erosion, and then the sat map that we just created for the dark trees, and we use this as the mask to blend the two together. Finally, we feed everything into the LightX node so we can get a cool render. And so with some of these lighting settings already done, where it's basically just, high sun intensity and, a lot of ozone, and then slightly higher angular diameter so we get softer shadows, we can now show off our finished volcano. So yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. This is ready for export. Let's just switch this to 4K to see what it looks like in even more detail. And there. Took about a minute to reprocess the whole graph, which is fair given we have like a bunch of heavy simulations down there. But our world is rebuilt at 4K. Let's check out some of the cooler details here. Yeah, I do like that we have this big collapse. From afar, let's say if we're dealing with a game or something, or even just a big wide establishing shot, like this gives this mountain its character. Same for all of these. So it's easy to recognize where you're on different sides. Another crucial element when you're designing games. So with this, let's go take a look at the cone. Yeah, I definitely like this. There's all that rocky buildup, and then the collapse inside. It's tempting to add lava here, but we'll save that for a different video. But let's quickly take a look at the vegetation. So here you can see some of the vegetation coming down, mainly in the texture, and then that's accentuated by the individual trees that we're growing up here. Oops, I had the wrong underlay. forgot to set it here. There we go. Now we have the trees. So there. Yeah, I like this. So yeah, so you can tweak with this however you like. The file is included with Gaea, so go ahead, play with this. We're eager to see what kind of cool stuff you create with this. Thanks for joining us.